A common challenge when athletes travel, especially away from their regular training environment, is that they often face difficulties accessing quality strength training equipment. This became especially apparent during the COVID-19 period when facilities were shut down and many athletes found themselves without any strength training resources. As per literature, resistance training suggests that loads exceeding 60% of 1 RM are needed to stimulate increases in muscular hypertrophy and strength. Longitudinal training using high loadings has also been shown to improve performance metrics such as sprint time and power outputs. As a result, S&C coaches and athletes often rely on high-load resistance training programs to enhance their performance. However, the recent pandemic-induced gym closures and travel restrictions highlighted the challenges of not having access to the necessary equipment to achieve these loads. Mechanical stress when using high percentages of RM loadings helps to activate the necessary molecular and hormonal pathways that help to drive the subsequent improvements from this type of lifting. But if we can't create the necessary mechanical stress and subsequent pathway activation due to the lack of access to high loads, how can we produce the necessary stress on the body to elicit the same physiological responses? This led to my exploration of combining blood flow restriction and isometric strength training. BFR training involves applying pressure to the uppermost part of the arms or legs. Most research on BFR and resistance training has focused on the low intensity range of 20 to 40% of 1 RM, where it has been shown to result in increases in muscle strength and hypertrophy, as well as other performance improvements. Interestingly, the activation of hormonal, molecular, and intramuscular pathways that are seen in traditional high-load lifting also occur during low-load BFR resistance training. Hence, the inclusion of BFR was central to my theory. In this type of training, BFR acted as a proxy for high loads or high mechanical stress. Where high-load strength training emphasizes mechanical stress, blood flow restriction utilizes metabolic stress. With respect to isometric training, and in particular the overcoming or pushing variation, this type of training has been shown to improve isometric force production, dynamic strength, and jump performance. This type of training involves exerting force against an immovable object, and one significant advantage of isometrics is that it requires minimal equipment, making it a convenient solution in the absence of specialized setups or high-load resistance training equipment. Strength coach and author Yuri Verkhoshansky wrote about the advantages of performing overcoming isometric training with the addition of high external loads to ensure maximal muscular activation. Although we did have access to 40 kilograms of weight and lifting bands, the incorporation of BFR ensured that the athlete achieved maximal muscular contraction, which is another advantage of BFR resistance training. Another topic that Yuri Verkhoshansky discusses is a training concept called the shock regime. This is where an isometric exercise is supersetted with the plyometric exercise. And he discusses how this training method can positively affect the muscular system. It achieves this by enhancing motor neuron stimulation, intensities, and muscular tension. For the lower body, think of exercises like a drop or a depth jump. So for the upper body, we used a push-up variation to achieve a similar movement and response. Hence, the idea behind this training study and the training methodology was to design a training program using limited load, mimicking conditions where an athlete might only have access to basic gym equipment, as during the COVID shutdowns. Hence, the program incorporated BFR, isometric strength training via the use of a tie-down, and a maximum of 40 kilograms of external load, as well as lifting bands. If the athlete felt capable, he would add additional lifting bands to the exercise. This was based upon subjective feelings of being able to continue to create maximal perceived force. For context, 40 kilograms aligned to 25% of the athlete's bench press 1 RM. And this also fits within the range of loadings used for low-intensity BFR resistance training, and is somewhat easily accessible when limited equipment is available. Lifting bands also would be something that most athletes could easily access when traveling, or they have limited access to quality training equipment. The 9-week study period was segmented into 2 distinct phases, each with unique isometric emphasis. The first phase, lasting 4 weeks, centered on a not explosive isometric regime, as classified by Yuri Verkhoshansky. This is characterized by an increase or build in tension to a perceived peak in maximal strength. The cues of grind or build are sometimes used, and the athlete builds muscular tension over 2 to 3 seconds to their perceived maximum strength and then holds that for the prescribed pushing time. The 5th week served as a transitional period. Here, the athlete practiced the second phase's isometric approach, which is termed an explosive isometric regime. During this type of isometric contraction, the emphasis is in the speed of tension development in isometric pushing actions to foster explosive and initial starting strength. This transition week served not only as a deliberate periodized deload week, but it ensured that the execution of the exercise performed during the second 4-week phase of the training intervention was maximized. This study also incorporated variations in plyometric focus according to the 2 phases. Looking at the phase 1 plyometrics, I adopted a method termed absorb, teaching the athlete to absorb force in specific stances. For example, the athlete performed a push-up, drop, and catch movement, where the athlete would drop off a small box into a low catch position. Here, they would absorb the force and hold for prescribed time. The theory is that the force absorption capability helps to lay a foundation for the subsequent more intensive phase, where athletes must generate maximum explosive force. Full-range plyometric exercises were also included, and in phase 1, explosive push-ups were introduced. They were performed with rhythm in mind, focusing on full-range explosive movements with multiple reps at approximately 80% of perceived maximum intensity. The plyometric exercise emphasis in phase 2 was termed create, and this is where exercise aimed for rapid force production. Rebound concepts and plyometric-based drills are integrated here. For instance, the drop, catch, and hold push-up, which was performed in phase 1, now transitions to a drop push-up where the athlete drops, absorbs the force, and explodes in one fluid motion. The full-range plyometric exercise used in this phase was a progression from phase 1, and in this case, the athlete performed clap push-ups. Looking at the session structure, they were divided into 4 distinct sections. 1, warm-up. 2, high-rep bench press. 3, isometrics. And lastly, high-rep ancillary strength. BFR was used at all times. The cuff width used in the study was 5 centimeters, allowing for full range of movement during all exercises. And the pressure was set at 80% of limb occlusion pressure. As with all training, it's important to start with a good warm-up, and this was reflected in section 1 and to some extent section 2. Every session began with preparatory movements to get the upper body moving. BFR is also great for attenuating joint and tendon pain, so this is a fantastic way to get the body feeling great. The warm-up then included light TheraBand movements such as reverse flies, face pulls, and rotator cuff exercises. Progressing the warm-up, the athlete would include body weight, long duration, isometric holds in a push-up position and reverse fly. The second section required the athlete to perform 3 sets of high repetition BFR bench press with reps ranging between 15 to 20. The aim here was to induce high metabolic stress to activate the positive anabolic, hormonal, and metabolic pathways associated with BFR training. By this stage, the athlete was really warmed up well, and hence we ensured that he was primed for a good session and adequately prepared for the more intense isometric section. Each isometric section would include an exercise that would require a push and pull, utilizing both small and large joint angles. As isometric training is joint specific, this ensured that the athlete was training across a greater spectrum of joint angles, especially in the bench press, as this was one of our primary physical tests. Based on these parameters, on day 1, the athlete would perform an isometric bench press close to full extension. This would be supersetted with the plyometric push-up drop, catch, and hold exercise. The pulling exercise would include an isometric bent over row, supersetted with the continuous plyometric push-up performed with rhythm. Day 2 would see the athlete perform the isometric bench press with a smaller joint angle, and the back pulling exercise would be an isometric seated row. The plyometric push-up exercises would be the same as day 1. As a general rule, the athlete performed 3 sets of each isometric exercise for 3 reps each set. Pushing times for the isometric exercises were 5 seconds during the not explosive phase and 3 seconds for the explosive phase. Maximal exertion was encouraged on all repetitions. Although this could not be gauged as there was no feedback tool available, we felt that the combination of the low external load, the BFR cuffs, and the lifting history of the athlete provided the necessary stimulus. The last section of the training program concluded with the inclusion of a giant set, where 2 to 3 exercises were supersetted one after each other. These exercise combinations included other muscle groups not trained during the session to assist with continued specific strength development, overall muscle balance, and general muscular strength. For example, this may include a routine such as floor bench, bent over row, into shrugs. Other exercise routines may have included dumbbells or lifting bands. Each exercise was programmed 12 to 15 repetitions in this section. Although this sits outside the typical 75 rep protocol we normally read about with low load BFR resistance training, the total volume per set was up to 45 reps, and literature has reported improvements with a lower repetition 3x15 protocol. And cumulatively, a large contraction volume under the BFR cuff restriction had already been performed. The training program employed a continuous BFR cuff pressure and was typically held across each section of the training program. Then, at the completion of each section, the athlete was allowed to deflate the cuff if needed. For example, after completing the warm-up, the athlete could deflate his cuffs while packing away that equipment and then reinflate for the commencement of the first section of the isometric exercise. Overall, a maximum continuous inflation period of 15 minutes was adhered to as per suggested by safety guidelines. As we can see with the results, 9 weeks of this type of training achieved notable improvements across all 3 tests. The athlete wasn't able to reproduce his 1RM bench press test. This isn't surprising as during this training block, the athlete didn't lift anywhere near his 1RM. In my experience as an S&C coach, if you want to improve your 1RM, you need to be lifting close to those loads, especially across a 9-week training period. Some other interesting points that weren't captured in the reported results. For the bench throw, only peak velocity was reported in the results, as we felt this was a more accurate measurement for this ballistic movement. Although not shown, we did record average velocity, and we found greater improvements when compared to the changes in peak velocity. For the 20 kilogram throw, the athlete improved 10.9% compared to 3.1% improvement in peak velocity. And for the 30 kilogram bench throw, the athlete improved their average velocity 8.6%. And this was compared to a 6.4% improvement for peak velocity. As this was a case study, there was limited scope for detailed statistical analysis. Despite this, the percentage improvements across the 9-week training block does show a noteworthy improvement. And when compared against benchmarks established in competitive performance enhancement studies and elite bench press powerlifters, improvements between 0.4 to 0.8% have been reported to be significant. Also, subjectively, the athlete reported that he did not feel sore the next day, unlike when he would train using traditional high-load lifting. As a result, the athlete felt he was able to recover in between sessions and perform at his best for subsequent sessions. In lieu of the improvement in testing results, the idea of being able to train with minimal DOMs provides a potential additional advantage for athletes who compete and train for sports that require high technical skill components, such as track and field events like the sprints, or throwing events of the shot put and discus. In fact, the ability to improve muscular power performance whilst minimalizing DOMs from resistance training could benefit pretty much most athletes. As a result, this resistance training program would minimize any potential impact to subsequent skill-based training sessions when compared to traditional high-load resistance training. Longitudinally, one could hypothesize this to be a favorable outcome for the athlete. For those who require to continually develop their 1 rep maximum, potentially integrating 1 session per week incorporating low volume, high intensity reps may provide the necessary stimulus for this. Overall, the athlete found this program to be efficient, adaptable, and beneficial, especially given the reduced post-training soreness and the flexibility it offers for other training forms. And with the improvements in the performance test, this definitely provides a viable alternative to traditional high-load strength training programs. To wrap this up, this methodology, which combines low-load upper body BFR training with isometric strength training, provides athletes with a beneficial avenue for training, especially when resources are limited, without compromising performance. I hope this video offers insights for your own coaching endeavors. If you have any questions, leave it in the comments box below or catch me during the conference.